I'm one of the weirdos that enjoys updating his iPhone every single year. I like having the newest, latest, greatest technology, but this is the very first time in quite a while that I've decided not to upgrade my phone. After days of testing and comparing the 15 Pro with my older 14 Pro, I've decided that these phones are just too similar. It's not worth an additional $1,300 for this phone. Let me show you the test I did to figure this out. One of the features that Apple highlighted for the 15 Pro is that this phone is now made of titanium rather than stainless steel. You will feel a difference when you pick both of these phones up. I personally prefer the heavier feel of last year's model, and I've seen a few drop tests between these two phones, and in every single test, last year's model made of stainless steel survived drops better than this year's out of titanium, so I think this is a downgrade for sure. On the 14 Pro, the stainless steel is polished. I think it looks fantastic, but it's also going to hold up to scratches much better. This year, the titanium is actually painted, and I think this is going to scratch super easily. Like most of you, I haven't turned my ringer on in probably 5 years, so I was happy that they finally got rid of the mute switch on the side, and they've replaced it with a programmable action button, which you can set to do anything you want. I have mine set to open up the camera. Of course, the new phone has a faster processor with better graphics, blah, 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 but the truth is my 14 Pro works flawlessly, so I really don't need that upgraded. Of course, the big news, which is sad that it's big news, is that the new iPhone comes with USB-C now rather than the old Lightning port, and instead of USB 2.0 speeds, we now have 3.0 speeds. Now, being that I'm a Mac user and I have the ability to airdrop files from my phone over to my computer, I don't really plug my phone in anymore, so this isn't really necessary. However, this phone does shoot ProRes video, which I'm going to test in a second, and if you want to be able to transfer them over quickly and reliably, you're going to want to use the cable. I tested this out and I learned a couple of things. First of all, when I'm using the case with my phone here, none of my USB 3.0 cables fit into the hole in the bottom of the case, so I literally have to take the case off anytime I want to plug it into my computer, which is a huge pain. And as you can tell, this case is incredibly tight. This is Apple's fine woven case. I'm not a fan of it. It's very slick. I'm actually going to return it. But I would suggest, oh, and look, taking the case out actually reset the phone. If you are one of the few people that's going to be shooting in ProRes, I actually think it's easier to shoot on an external device, some sort of external storage, and then transfer that storage to a computer rather than having to plug your phone in every time. I've done a few tests, and for some reason with this SSD, it doesn't work, but I've got this card reader here with an SD card in it, and you'll notice when I plug this into my phone, it automatically shows up down here, USB. You can see USB-C. And when that shows up, it's telling you that instead of recording internally to the phone, it's going to be recording to whatever you have plugged into USB-C. Now, I think Apple's done an amazing job of making this easy and seamless, but at the same time, I think it's pointless because shooting in ProRes is absolutely not worth it. On the left here, this is the standard MP4 file, and on the right is the ProRes file. Even when I zoom into 400%, this footage looks almost identical to me. Now, if you start doing crazy edits to this footage, you will notice that the MP4 file starts falling apart faster, but neither of these hold up really well to editing, so in my personal opinion, it's not worth the hassle. Now, for the first time ever, the 15 Pro can shoot in S-Log, and some Pro cameras can do this. It's a flat profile, and this should give you more dynamic range and editing ability when you get back into post. But is that true for the iPhone? On the left is the standard MP4 file, and on the right is the footage shot in S-Log. Obviously, it looks much worse right now, but after a color grade, we can get this footage looking very similar. I'm sorry to say that I was not able to see much more dynamic range by shooting in S-Log. One significant thing that I did notice though was that sharpening wasn't added to the S-Log footage. If I add sharpening, I can get both of these clips to look almost identical, but this may be a little too much sharpening, so I believe currently the only way to have control over the sharpening on your video is to shoot an S-Log. Although we're looking into every ridiculous detail in these tests, I am not a pixel peeper. I don't shoot on the highest bitrate or in S-Log on my Pro camera, so there's no way I'm ever going to use these settings on the iPhone, but it's still cool that they give you the option. This video is sponsored by Click-a-Snap, which is a brand new social media platform. It's one part Instagram, one part Shutterstock, and one part Google AdSense all wrapped into one. The most unique element of Click-a-Snap is that you get paid up to $9 for every 1,000 views your images get,
which is honestly much more than we get paid on YouTube. And if you want, you can choose to sell your photos on the platform as well. Unlike every other social media platform, with Click a Snap, you don't have to give up your image rights. You don't have to figure out how to game some algorithm, and there's no data harvesting or selling to third-party entities. If you're a photographer looking for a new way to display your work while also making money, join Click a Snap in the link below.
Now, the biggest reason to upgrade your phone every single year are the camera upgrades. And Apple has been doing an amazing job of giving at least one of the cameras in these phones a huge ISO boost every single year, almost doubling the ISO performance. That's not the case this year. Let's talk about each camera one by one, and we'll start with the ultra wide first. First, I shot video with both phones and they look almost identical. I then checked the stabilization on the ultra wide angle lens by walking with both cameras, and the footage also looks almost identical. Photos taken in bright daylight look almost identical, and photos taken at night look almost identical as well. Back in the studio, I wanted to test high ISO performance by shooting with each phone on a tripod, and I decided to photograph some overpriced hot sauce that I have. What's weird is when I was shooting in really dark environments handheld, both of the images looked almost identical, but you'll notice when I shot on a tripod, the iPhone 14 Pro does have a problem with over sharpening that has been fixed on the 15 Pro. The telephoto camera is a similar story. Taking video, it looks very similar. Taking walking video, the stabilization looks the exact same. Taking photos, the sharpness and the dynamic range looks almost identical. Shooting in low light looks almost the exact same as well. So this is not looking good for the iPhone 15 Pro, but I'm happy to say that the standard lens and the one that you're going to be using the most often and the one that gives you the most quality is a pretty significant upgrade this year. Now, when I look at 4K video footage out of both of these phones on the standard camera, it looks very similar to me, almost identical, which leads me to believe that all of the upgrades that I'm about to show you with the new phone and this new camera have nothing to do with the hardware itself and everything to do with software, which makes me believe that they could have brought these features to the 14 Pro and chose not to, but of course, that's just a guess. Walking with both phones shows that there's no significant upgrade to stabilization, but when we start taking still photographs, there are some pretty big changes here. Now, the main camera on the iPhone 15 Pro now shoots natively at 24 megapixels, but it is not a legitimate 24 megapixels. If I shoot 24 on the 15 Pro, 12 megapixels on the 14 Pro, and then I scale them to match, you'll notice that the images out of the 14 Pro are actually sharper. Now, I don't think this is legitimate sharpness. I think this is over sharpening from software, and I don't think it looks great. So I would say that the photos out of the 15 Pro are slightly better, but only slightly, and certainly not double the resolution. More impressive than that, though, is the dynamic range. Look at how much more data the 15 Pro is capturing in these contrasty scenes. I don't think this has anything to do with a new impressive camera sensor. I think the sensor is just taking multiple images and then putting them together, which again makes me believe that they could have done this on the 14 Pro with a simple update, but have chosen not to. Now, you can't just add unlimited dynamic range and expect the images to get better and better. For example, take a look at this image that I took of myself here. Obviously, the 15 Pro has done a great job of saving the background, but it's also done that at the expense of underexposing myself. The image out of the 14 Pro looks a lot more like a photograph, and in this particular case, I might actually prefer it. That being said, most of the time, I do prefer the images out of the 15 Pro, and I do like that extra dynamic range, and if I feel like the images need a little bit of contrast, I can easily add that. One other strange thing that I noticed was that the 15 Pro has a tendency to choose a white balance that's a little bit warmer than the 14 Pro. I think this is going to come down to personal preference. I personally might like that more correct or cooler white balance that the 14 Pro is choosing natively, but some of you might prefer the warmer look of the 15 Pro. Now, because the sensor in both of these phones on the standard camera is 48 megapixels, it gives you the ability to crop in digitally without losing any data. And when you zoom in on both of these cameras, I will say the footage looks pretty good. Images out of the 15 Pro are slightly sharper, but what you will notice is that they have more dynamic range and less contrast over the 14 Pro. Once again, when we shoot in low light, you'll notice that the ISO performance of both of these cameras is very similar. The 14 Pro is still suffering from that strange over sharpening, but again, I'm not really sure that you can see this unless you're zoomed into 400%. The bottom line is that the iPhone 15 Pro is an amazing phone with amazing features, but so was the 14 Pro. And if you happen to be one of these people that's constantly plugging in your phone and transferring large files, then absolutely, it's probably worth upgrading to the 15 Pro just for those USB 3 speeds. But for all of the rest of us who transfer files wirelessly, you would literally be upgrading this phone for slightly better image quality out of only one of the 3 cameras on the back of the phone. And at the same time, I think you'd be giving up the slightly better build quality of the stainless steel 14 Pro. So for all of these reasons, I'm going to be returning my 15 Pro. And to be honest, it feels kind of good. You know, I don't need this phone and it feels a lot better having $1,300 in my pocket.